Travis Campbell, it's good to see you, brother.
It's good to see you. It's good to be seen.
Yeah.
It's always nice to get out and just talk.
Means we're alive and kicking.
It's an 80s song, right? Alive and kicking.
Yeah.
See, if my dear friend Lane Tipton were here, he would remind me of gosh, it's on the tip of my tongue. Alive and kicking. Not Thompson Twins. No. Who's saying "Don't You Forget About Me"?
Won't you forget about me? I don't remember. I'm pretty good with those, but I don't know them all.
I'll remember it right when we're ending the show.
Yeah, that's how it goes. So this is Travis and Ross, and this is Notes On, and we try to do Christ on purpose. And you said, so I've got a chance, Travis, in 2 days. I'm going to give a talk again on near-death experiences, which is one of the most fascinating things that occurs in our modern day life. And I think the implications for our faith. What is it?
Lines.
Yeah.
I cheated. I looked it up. I cheated.
Oh, I'm not impressed.
Well, anyway, go ahead. I interrupted you.
That's okay. Wouldn't be the first time.
I might interrupt you again this evening.
You might. So I think NDEs, Travis, have a lot of they can carry a lot of weight. As Christians, there's a lot there that really is evidence for the faith, contributes to the faith. The world is a spiritual world, and I think the evidence from NDEs, especially the ones that are verifiable, the ones where people are flatlined, no brain waves, no heartbeat, in the middle of surgery, on the operating table, and the experience that they have is that they float up out of their body and oftentimes see things in the operating room or the room next door, or sometimes a long ways away that are verifiable things. They really, really perceive them. And how that works, we don't know, but there's that happens. There's a lot of weight that carries for us. There's a lot of implications to just that fact. Even if you don't believe that the NDE continues into a more of an afterlife situation, just that they perceive things that are verifiable later on, often by people who are hostile to any kind of faith tradition, but have to recognize that this thing really happened.
Right.
And so I'm going to have a chance to do this talk again. I've added a piece that I thought might be fun to kick around. And that is, what are the implications of that simple thing that I just laid out? And so what do you want to say about that?
I was just going to ask you, do you give, there's a very simplified argument for the soul that arises out of NDEs.
Yes.
Do you give that argument? In other words, the argument goes as follows. The question is, are these things possible? Now, so you're not asking whether they're true or whether they actually happen. And I found it effective to ask atheists and materialists this question: is it? Let's lay aside whether they actually happened.
Okay.
These people had these veridical experiences. They possibly happened. Are you willing to grant that they possibly happened? And most people will say, well, yeah, it's possible. I mean, like an atheist might say, yeah, it's possible. I just don't think it happened. It's better to explain just through some sort of hallucinatory experiences. The brain is dying. You have all these visions and blah, blah, blah. But it didn't actually happen. It was not veridical, as we say. And I'll say, okay. So, but you grant it's possible. well, then you just prove the existence of the soul before you even get to the issue of whether they actually happen. You at least know that a soul exists, and they'll say, well, how do you know that? I mean, just because it's possible doesn't mean that you have a soul. And the argument is, whatever is possibly true of me, but cannot possibly be true of my body, has to be independent of the body or distinct from the body.
That's
In
right.
other words, just the possibility that these things happen proves that we have a soul. And that's even before you get to the truthfulness of them happening.
That's a good point. It's like everybody sort of has an intuition that there's a way in which our mind and our body are separate.
Right.
You know, we can imagine.
One of the great things about the gender debate just is the fact that it's reintroduced the idea of the soul.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
That's all right. I lost my train of thought.
Well, if you say, if I say I am not a man, well, my body is clearly a physical thing that we would call male. So if I'm not reducible to my body, I must be more than my body. So in order for that debate, and by the way, I'm still not even really sure what the YouTube censors are doing, so I'm not using these words. Everybody knows what words I'm supposed to be using, but the whole debate can only really be meaningful if there's an immaterial dimension to who we are.
Right. And we can imagine, Travis, getting a heart transplant or losing our arm or losing our ear. We could be quadriplegic. We could have all four limbs removed.
Yeah.
And our identity would remain.
Mm-hmm.
And in reality, I'm not sure if it's true of our bones, but all the fleshy parts of our body actually replace themselves on a pretty regular basis. Every few months. I think it's like 90 days or something.
Yeah, the entire body, all the cells in your body is replaceable within 7 years.
Yeah. And so I am literally a different person than I was when I was a kid, 8 times over.
Sure.
Yet I am still the same person because my soul is the same. And so there's a sort of a distinction that everybody makes intuitively. You have to be talked out of that, really, to not believe it, I think.
Right. What's that old paradox that the Greeks would give, the myth of Theseus, the ship of Theseus?
Yeah.
And the question is, if you send a ship out to sea and every time it comes to port and you replace one part of it, so that within, say, 7 years, every single part of that ship has been replaced, is it the same ship?
Right.
And intuitively you would say no. Well, then how do you maintain personal identity over time?
Well, the difference is we have a soul and a ship doesn't.
That's right. And so that actually becomes the argument for the soul. Right. So if you say my personal identity over time is a basic belief, then the only way to maintain that basic belief is really, in my opinion, twofold. You could be a strict materialist, but in order to maintain my personal identity over time, you would have to believe in a God who sustains that identity via matter.
Right.
Okay. Or you could go the easier route and say, well, I just have an immaterial thing called the soul, which is closely identified with the body, but it's not reducible to it. And therefore, I can still be the same me, even though every physical part is replaced every 7 years.
Right. And, there's an interesting part to that. It gets a little more complicated. I think of myself as the same person, much because I remember things. I have a memory of my childhood, of my adolescence, of my whole life. Now, yet there's no way in which you can say, I'm not the same person if I had some devastating memory loss, right?
Mm-hmm.
Somehow I am still the same person. And it really comes down to, why? Well, it's sort of because God says so. He gives us identities in the Bible.
Right.
How do we define that identity? It's the same soul, but we can't see the soul. So
Mm-hmm.
there's sort of a faith aspect there. We just have to take it on faith that I am identical to the person that was, that I have the same memories of. But if I didn't have the memories, I'd still be the same person somehow. That's very interesting, actually.
It is, and to me, it explodes the common materialistic answer for how they maintain identity over time. The most common answer is memory. But what do you do if I lose all my memories?
That's
And
right.
on a purely materialist basis, without a God sustaining that personal identity, it's very hard to maintain personal identity over time. You can't ground it in memory because that's too fickle. There are a lot of memories I've lost. So, I mean, I haven't gone through some like complete amnesia. But that notwithstanding, I still lose a lot of memories. So maybe I'm not the same person. I just don't see how on a materialist basis, a strictly atheistic materialist basis, you can maintain personal identity. The Buddhists just go ahead and bite into that and say, exactly. That's why moment by moment, you are a totally new person.
Yeah, and that doesn't work either, does it?
No, and the process theologians, many of them have basically taken Buddha's metaphysic and Plato's metaphysic, and they've glued them together so that the ideas of God are eternal and unchanging. But God himself, his actual nature, is identified with the processes of history, so that God is constantly becoming a new being every moment. And we reflect that. In fact, Whitehead, and I have a dear friend, he's not a close friend, but he's an old classmate of mine, just a wonderful man who is an expert in process theology. And so he's going to be helping me out, as I'm doing more research into this. But Whitehead had a very curious statement that's always been stuck in my head. Like, what does he mean by this? It is as true to say that God makes the world as that the world makes God. He says that God is not the substrate that keeps everything from collapsing. So all these contingent things all around us, God is not that which keeps it from collapsing. He's the chief exemplification of that. So God is more radically contingent than anything else and does not even survive the moment. A new God is literally created moment by moment.
So if you ask them, is it possible that the God that exists could have not existed? What would they say?
You'll get different answers from different process theologians. Like Hartshorne was a defender of the ontological argument, which tried to show that God is a necessary being. Ironically, they would say, well, God is always ceasing existing, but a new God emerges. So the process would be necessary, but no particular manifestation of it is necessary. At the very least, I would have to say that that's the best way to answer that question, given what they say in all these other questions. That's the best way to give the answer.
And what does that even mean, Travis, to say that something ceases to exist and then comes back into existence the next moment? I mean, that's what it.
Just remember, for the Buddhist and by extension the process theologian, at least the old classical ones, the guys like Cobb and Hartshorne and Ogden and those guys, they would say there is no it to come back into existence. What is real is the process, and it vanishes moment by moment. So there are no substances that endure through time. Those things don't. This is what I would call an event metaphysic. And so everything is constantly in process. The human person, your soul, whatever you want to call it, none of that is going to last at all. You don't last the moment. And this is the Buddhist answer for why in reincarnation you don't remember your past lives. Hindus have a hard time with that, because if Atman, my spirit, if that is Brahman, if that's the same as God, that's the inner core of me. If it is constantly moving into one incarnation after the other, why don't I remember prior lives?
Right.
The Buddhist has an answer. There's only an aspect of you. They call them aggregates, and you're made up of various aggregates, say the Buddhists. And it's a specific aggregate of you, your will to move and live and acquire more and more. That's what survives the death of your body. So it's not really a soul. There is no soul in Buddhism, at least the Theravada tradition, the classical tradition. They even call this the no soul doctrine. Anatman is how they call it. There's no soul that endures through time. It's just process. It's the principle of impermanence. And so Buddhaghosa, a great Buddhist mystic, said, speech is, but no speaker is found. Action is, but no actor is found. Right.
But it took a speaker and an actor to say that.
Right. That is exactly what you and I would say, but they would say you're just a Western logic chopping person. This is the fundamental truth. The reason you suffer is because you're trying to feed a self that doesn't exist. That's why you suffer.
I see that. Yeah. Okay. But that's not an answer.
It's an answer that removes a common presupposition that we have. Their solution is to say, you keep trying to feed yourself. And by the way, there is a lot of truth to what they're saying. We do have an ego problem in the West.
Yes, we do.
That's why you can't go and so, like, one of my favorite doctrines of the Buddhists is right concentration. And I see it as a kind of, I call it an echo of Eden. You know, just there were certain truths that were taught to our first parents that sort of trickle through. And you see these popping up in different philosophies all over the place. And right concentration is a great one. It's the one pardon the pun, it's the one that I concentrate on with my students when I'm teaching them this stuff. And right concentration is seen all the time, like on Facebook. People are going out to concerts, and what do they do at the concert? They hold up their phone. They don't immerse themselves in the music. They hold up their phone and are like, me, look where I am. And they want to get likes on Facebook and feed the ego. They spent all that money to go to the concert, and they don't even really enjoy the concert. Or when you're reading a book and you're constantly daydreaming, or when you're sitting in class and you're going, I can't wait till this class is over, so I can go see so-and-so at lunch. And then then you're at lunch and you're like, I can't wait till the day is over.
Yeah.
And you're just losing your day. And this is a very good point that they're making. Their solution, to me, is horrendous, because what it does is, if you're just a no self that doesn't survive the moment, why should I have compassion on you or towards you? Doesn't it belittle the person?
Yeah.
So, I mean, this is, to me, a great internal critique. It's an ethical critique nonetheless, but it's a great internal critique, because the Buddha says we have to have compassion. To what? Insubstantial no selves that don't endure the moment?
It destroys the need for love.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. So there's this great insight, right concentration. Stop feeding your ego. That's awesome. But it's couched in this worldview that just, it doesn't make a lick of sense.
There's no human dignity in that worldview. It brings us,
absolutely, yeah.
It brings us down to the animals. It brings us down just to stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, it's even worse. There's no stuff that it is brought down to. In other words, it's just process. And so we're even lower than the animals
Yeah.
because there is no animal that endures through time. There's just the flow. It's the process. There was a school of thought called the personalists, and these were Buddhists who rebelled against the no soul doctrine. And they've estimated, they being Condi, the Buddhist scholar that I read, he estimates that it may have been as many as 3/4 of Buddhists at one point were personalists, and they were basically these people who were monks who were looking at their masters going, the emperor has no clothes. They just said, look, there is a self. There has to be a self. I mean, what is it that's receiving karmic debt from previous lives if not the self?
Right.
Now, we've had times in Christian history, we've had a significant number of people depart from a certain teaching. That's true. But to think that within a couple hundred years, 3/4 were denying the absolute heart of Buddhism. That would be like 3/4 of Christians denying the resurrection.
Yeah.
And that would blow me away. If I were to go back in time and meet, like, most of the Christians I met didn't think that the resurrection actually happened, I'd have to sit down and like rethink my faith.
Yeah.
You know,
No kidding.
like,
Yeah.
so if 3/4 of Buddhists were denying the no soul doctrine,
So what happened to them?
they weren't persecuted in the way we would think of persecution, but they were slandered by the the higher ups, and they were never able to get a foothold. But the Orthodox Buddhists had to constantly suppress them, silence them, not with logical answers, but shut up.
So let me switch gears here, Travis. We've got a few minutes left, and there's at least one point that I want to make that I think is really important on this this NDE thing.
Yeah.
And that is that if we have an immaterial soul, which NDEs seem to provide almost irrefutable evidence for. Okay, so when people are in that state, their body is, let's say they're floating up in the operating room and they're seeing something that they could not have seen had they been even awake on the operating table. That one woman that memorized the 12-digit number on top of the one of the machines that was like taller than a refrigerator, and then came back into her body, recounted the number. They went up on a ladder and looked, and it was digit for digit the right number. Okay, so think about what this means. We are still conscious. We are still ourselves. This woman said that she had OCD. And what do you do if you have OCD and you see a number? You memorize the number. Well, interestingly, that means she still had the OCD when she was out of body. She still has, you're still rational. And really, really important, she remembered it. So where was the memory stored in the time between when she perceived that information and she went back into her body?
Right.
Now, all of that being true, which I don't think you can argue with it anymore. What that means is that our consciousness, this sound and light show that we have every day that we wake up with, this awareness, this first person experience that we have is triggered by the soul. It's in us because we have a soul.
Right.
And I'm going to make the claim that I believe this means that no machine, no AI will ever be sentient, not in the way that we are, because they don't have an immaterial soul. And I think as Christians, we really need to be very clear on this, and we need to pound on this, because I was listening to a really smart guy today. We know Alex O'Connor in a conversation with Greg Kokel. And Alex O'Connor was talking about, well, maybe machines are going to be sentient, and maybe machines are going to somehow be aware and conscious. And I think we have to realize what would happen if that became a widespread belief. And what's going to happen is robots are going to get rights, like you've said. It's going to bring people down to things and things up to people, and it's all going to flatten out. And I think we're going to lose that idea of us being created in God's image.
Agreed.
Part of what defines us as image bearers is that we have that eternal, immaterial part of us that will never be duplicated in a machine. And so as Christians, I think it's really important that we're clear on that we understand that, and we bring it up every time we can, because what's going to happen if the culture starts to buy this idea that machines can become sentient, it's going to be devastating. We're going to start having rights for machines, and it's going to pull the trigger for, people to be even more repressive of human beings because, well, we're just meat machines after all.
And as I said in one of our previous programs, that would just mean the Christians who hold to the kind of view you just espoused, and I espouse it too, will just be considered a certain kind of racist.
Yeah,
so that's right. Christians who believe in a soul will be marginalized. I think that given what you said, and I agree, machines can't think. What's going to happen, however, I think the government will mimic thinking so well. And this goes back to John Searle's experiment that we talked about in a previous show, where you can mimic the exchange of Chinese characters and convince somebody that you know Chinese, even if you don't know a lick of it.
Right. And that's all the machines are doing.
The machines, if you have a smart person behind the console moving the hands around and moving the body parts around and responding to questions, you can make anybody think that the machine is thinking.
Yeah.
Even if they don't and they don't have to do it like directly, like a ghost in the machine almost, but they would have to do it enough to where the machine is not thinking, but you think it's thinking.
If we believe that it's thinking, it will destroy human dignity, and it's just gonna open the gates to every crazy crackpot Marxist leader that wants to come along and just herd people up and do whatever they want with them.
Oh, yeah.
I think it's a really frightening implication, and we as Christians need to be very clear on what we believe and why we believe it. Because
absolutely, yeah.
Because the case for NDEs, the veridical part of NDEs, the case for us having an immaterial soul, is really not a religious argument. We're just looking at the facts from thousands and thousands of NDEs and saying there's something more going on there than the physical body. And if that's the case, machines are never going to be like us. It's a wonderful, clear, easy to understand argument for the Christian faith, for theism in general, really.
Yeah, because what worldview provides the furniture that makes a body soul distinction meaningful? Well, precisely one that gives a distinction between the universe and the creator of the universe.
Right.
And all the other ones collapse these things into each other so that it doesn't really matter. It's really interesting. Now, and you've been talking about machines thinking, and there's Frank Turek's wonderful little point that, we're just wet machines if atheism is true, or at least materialistic atheism is true. If the brain is the only thing that thinks, and we can get to the possibility of that in a minute, but if the brain is the only thing that thinks, what thinking is just the firing of neurons in your brain that creates an illusion of consciousness.
Right.
And where is the person among all that networking? Where's the person in all those neurons? These are just material little C fibers that are just firing all over the place. And so it's like just the firing of neurons constantly gets to the point where an illusion of self is created. Oh, wouldn't the Buddhists be happy if that's true? And then, so when you say, I am doing X, Y, or Z, you're just living out a pure illusion.
Right.
And so when you're thinking, you're not thinking. You're just under the illusion that you're thinking. So if materialism is true, it's not just that the machines can never think. We are not thinking.
That's right. That's
Yeah.
right.
So,
and that's why the transhumanists can think, well, it's all just programming. You know,
they never thought that.
What's that?
They never thought that.
That's right. And they aren't really they. There's no they. There's no person.
You to do the thinking. Yeah.
Somebody who says there's no such thing as human identity, I want to say, well, do you mind if I come over to your place tonight and take your stuff? Since, you know, you're not really a person, you know, who nobody owns it.
Yeah. I'd like to say a lot more, but we're out of time.
Yeah, we are. All right, brother.
Friend.
Next week.
Ta-ta.